Yeah, okay, I guess we can get started. Everything good to go, or?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, I'll do a quick intro just to get everyone back in the room. So thanks everyone. It looks like folks are returning online and folks are trickling back in here as well. I really appreciate the high attendance we're getting for this workshop. It seems like a lot of people are coming out to learn about geospatial and to partake in these tutorials and workshops that we put together. So I'm really happy to introduce Shruti Jain and Vivek Sakrani from Atlas AI, who have done amazing work putting together this crop type mapping tutorial for the Geospatial Analysis for Development Initiative in combination with Natalie Ayers again, who also helped on the previous tutorial, and the World Bank as well, right? Worked on this tutorial as well. This is our latest Geo4Dev tutorial. We're really excited about it. And I think this will be a great introduction to this approach and this data. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Shruti, who will lead our workshop.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thank you for inviting us. So we will start off with an introduction of Atlas AI and a little bit about what we're doing with this module. And Vivek, who's joining us from New York, is going to talk about that. So Vivek, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Shruti. I will start off. Let me first acknowledge. Actually, Sam, may I ask you to turn off your mic as I have an echo? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you to the Geo4Dev initiative for inviting us to present some of our work today. And thank you to SIGA for hosting us through the UC Berkeley campus and making the technology available for us to disseminate this to all of you that have joined either in person or online. A word about Atlas AI. Atlas AI is a public benefit corporation under US law, a company that focuses on development issues, as well as making data, software, and platforms available to commercial users. We are currently building the first AI-powered model of the global economy. And as you might guess, much of this work is based on using satellite imagery, machine learning, and field data collection. So for example, using our data and technology today, we're able to learn a lot more about where people and human settlements exist, what they're characterized by in terms of their socioeconomic well-being, the nature of infrastructure development and changes in that infrastructure, changes due to climate or other natural dynamics in the natural environment, and also anticipated outcomes. So in other words, forecasts. So to do that, how did we get here? So let me say a little bit about the origin story of our company. Should the next slide, please. So we were founded to build on the work by three of our academic founders, all based at Stanford, Professors David Lobel, Marshall Burke, and Stefana Erman. Over the last decade or so, these individuals, along with their collaborators, built on the body of work that used satellite imagery and machine learning, but specifically to interpret socioeconomic insights. This attracted the attention of entities like the Rockefeller Foundation, who wanted to enable us to make this technology available for ethical and impactful AI applications for the development sector to motivate human and socioeconomic outcomes. So Atlas AI is founded as a company in 2018. Next slide, please. Much of the work, as I said, is based on imagery and machine learning. And one of our hallmarks and values as a company is to publish much of our methodology driving the scientific insight in the peer-reviewed literature. So here are just three examples of recent papers that are available to interested readers in the public domain through journal access databases. Next slide, please. So for today, we're going to focus on crop type mapping as one technique to understand development of the agricultural sector on the ground. So we'll quickly cover the motivation and what's created this opportunity for us today as a community of collaborators. We'll focus specifically on the objective of today's tutorial, and then talk through the steps. And at the end of sort of the introductory remarks, I'll hand it over to Shruti to walk through the various steps of the tutorial. So let me just motivate today's specific idea by observing that smallholder farmers continue to dominate much of the agricultural economy in the world. So in many countries, up to 70% of the labor force might still be associated with agriculture, often working on farms or working near farms to work with the output of the agricultural sector. Next slide. Monitoring where this agricultural activity occurs has always been a challenging proposition. We often find statistics reported at the national level, or in some cases at the state and provincial level. But going deeper than that has been challenging for a few different reasons. One is identifying where these farms might be located. Two is the cost prohibitive and often difficult approach to reaching these farms and then being able to systematically track and monitor them over time. Yet, food security and disruptions today have made this even more important. For example, disruptions to the commodity supply chains due to the war in Ukraine or inflation issues may have disrupted where supply comes from. And in this case, being able to quickly understand how to cope with these dynamics or disruptions is becoming even more challenging. Yet, policymakers haven't had the data and the observation tools necessary to be able to focus on these issues. That's because traditional monitoring approaches continue to assume that to collect this data, there will be an extensive effort launched to measure and track agricultural activity in the field through surveys. Often these surveys might take a year to assemble and then maybe a year to deploy to thousands of sites across the country. And so solving this challenge at scale continues to be an opportunity. What's really been enabled in recent years, Shruti, next slide, please, is that remote sensing and cloud computing are increasingly becoming easier to use and linked together through automation techniques to monitor farms and estimate the productivity of those farms. Of course, as you might guess from the title of this workshop, a key step in these procedures is machine learning. That is teaching a computer algorithm to learn from a limited set of available data from on-the-ground observations, yet larger quantities of available satellite imagery over time to be able to estimate or predict a known outcome of interest. A context statement about this is that much of the work that is observed in this space continues to remain at the frontier of research. So there's a large community of global contributors and collaborators who are trying different techniques and methods to improve this. Some of those are published in literature, some of those remain in industry. But all of these techniques continue to require iteration and testing because many of these still require high quality ground observations for training in particular. So in this context, we will acknowledge the work that's being presented today. Next slide, please. Much of the data that we obtain for these experiments and workflows is enabled by the World Bank's Development Data Group under the aegis of the 50 by 2030 program. 50 by 2030 is a multi-partner initiative that is led by the World Bank, the UN FAO, and many IFAD and other entities to essentially move the conversation forward on how to collect data about the agricultural systems of countries and then monitor them over time. The thesis is that if we have improved ways to use limited but high quality data sets and then train computer algorithms, that we will enable a large number of countries to systematically engage in monitoring of their agricultural systems. In particular, the 50 by 2030 means that we hope to enable 50 countries across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America to build some of these procedures into their systems to then be able to continue this kind of work. Much of the work that Atlas has conducted to date is summarized in this paper that's shown on the slide here in the journal Remote Sensing, which is available under open access for interested readers. Next slide. So again, to quickly summarize, the objective of today's workshop is to essentially teach a machine learning model to identify crop types using satellite imagery and other features which are obtained from Earth observation data, with the intent of being able to then replicate these methods at scale. And ground truthing information or labels comes from field data collection, which was discussed in the context of the 50 by 2030 program. So as this very high level flowchart shows, we use imagery, labels, iterative model training, and inference to generate high resolution crop type maps and predictions of agricultural activity. With that, I'll hand it over to Shruti to first walk you through some initial setup steps that were shared, and then take you through the different steps of this tutorial.
Yep,
Yeah,
you're good.
Thanks, Vivek. So for today, I'll be talking about an exercise for crop type mapping, and what we'll try to do is we'll try to make this interactive, and we try it so that like all the participants can also execute the steps together with me. Overall, like there are four main features of this, four main steps that we're looking at, that we'll be looking at for this whole pipeline. Of course, that at the very beginning, there's step 0, which is survey data wrangling. So wherever you get your data from, it could be in any format. It may or may not have the variables like you want them. So there's that initial step of wrangling. But after that, like the first step that we engage in is basically collecting features from satellite imagery. These features would be used for the machine learning model. In the case of crop type mapping specifically, we make use of time series data from Sentinel-2. And I'll be talking more about that as we go through this workshop. But the idea is that through time series data, you can capture better information of what is happening on the ground. And as you can imagine, like if it's like an agricultural field, it will go through some changes through a year or through a season. And those changes can hopefully be captured by satellites, which we can then leverage. The next step is to generate composites. By composites, I just mean once you have the features from satellite imagery, you can imagine that these features would cover like a whole lot of geography. And we may or may not have labels for like that entire geography. So what we want to do is we want to sample those features from the locations where we have labels. So that process, I'm calling that process generating composites. I just mean that we will be generating like a normal CSV file or some kind of table which will have feature label combinations, like something that we usually use in machine learning. And then the next step you might be more familiar with is like a machine learning pipeline. It's for this case, it's just a random forest classifier that will then train on the feature label composites that we generated. And then the last step is inference. And here what I mean is once we have a machine learning model that knows how to map features to labels, we would then want to apply that model to the entire geography that we're interested in, so that we now have like data for the entire geography instead of just those spots where we had survey data. So I'll be using a Jupyter notebook to walk through all these steps. But before we can do that, I want to first make sure that the instructions that were sent out previously were all okay, and that like everyone was able to get their environment set up. But after that, I would like you to first clone this Git repository so that you also have access to the notebook that I'll be using, and then you can kind of work with that while I walk through all the steps. After cloning the Git repository, we also want to download some sample data that we have prepared for this workshop. And then lastly, just open Jupyter Notebook and activate the environment that we had set up earlier. So let's take maybe 5 minutes or 3 minutes to do all this. And then we can move ahead. I believe you also might have received an email from Sam, which has this text, so you don't have to like copy from the slide deck.
Yep. Sent that out a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes ago.
From the instructions that were sent to your email, when I was trying to install the repository from GitHub, I got the error that the directory or file doesn't exist, but like all the other libraries were installed in my Python environment. So do you know what would be happening there?
You mean the
Exactly
this
this
one?
one.
Which one was it?
It's the line right above this one. Git install Git plus. Yeah,
This
yeah,
one.
exactly.
Okay. So there's so was it an issue with Git or was it an issue with the repo?
It says no such file or directory. I don't know if it's correct. If it's correct, then I'm not sure what could be wrong. Like it says this directory doesn't exist. Even when I copy that into the browser.
Yeah, that's because it has the version number attached. So
Oh,
maybe that wouldn't work. But if you try this, it should. So the other option, if this doesn't work at all, is you can install this repo in edit mode. What that means is you just need to clone this repository. So just go to this link and clone this repository like you would normally. So I have the instructions for that here as well. So you clone the repository, then you go into that repository and then install it in edit mode. Make sure that you're in the environment, the right environment that you want to use. And then it will still be installed for this workshop. And then if you all could give me a thumbs up after you're done with the getting started bit, then I can move ahead.
Is there any way to like know that we successfully executed everything? Or is it just like everything copy pasted, everything's all done?
That's one, and then you can just type Panda list in your terminal, and then that will show you if these repositories are there. For example, you would see GDAL in that list, you would see GE tools in that list, and so on. That's another way. Yeah.
sorry, the very last line, what's the purpose of it when you authenticate?
Earth Engine.
Yeah.
So basically, like when we go through this code, we will be using, so basically we are calling the Earth Engine API in Python. And a lot of times we will be asking to pull imagery or write stuff, etc. So it's asking us to authenticate our account. So it lets you connect the Python API to your Google account. So that's what it's for. It's basically you're telling the Authentic API that you are the right user.
That part, I guess, the only one that I'm failing at.
We did receive an email earlier about this step. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
So you may need to have gcloud installed, which I hadn't realized earlier. And there are instructions here that tell you how to do that. It's just 2 steps.
Yeah, like
What's this one?
but I'm looking at the PDF. and
Yeah,
it's
so I
saying
think the
that-
PDF doesn't have like some of these details. I added these later after a few students reached out with installation issues. So if you go to the
Oh,
link,
these instructions thing.
yeah, these instructions, you can find these instructions in the link in the email that Sam might have just sent out.
Yeah.
If you follow the link there, you'll get here.
If anyone's missing the email, just let me know. Sure, everyone got it. So troubleshooting things in the chat, but it looks like people are figuring it out.
Yeah, this does take a lot of setting up, which is what I was a little worried about.
So I'm a little lost, sorry. So
Uh-huh.
here here have the repository and how is supposed to open it?
Are you talking about the GE tools? Are you talking about this step or this step?
Yeah, that's it.
The second one? Yeah, so you clone it. So you follow, you basically say git clone and then you clone the repository.
Right.
Did you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing you need to do is go to this folder, the data folder. And then you download this data, and then you, you put this inside your repository. So for example, this is my repository folder. I copied the data folder inside that.
And there's a question from Vera in the chat on whether they can put the data in a OneDrive folder and call it via Anaconda Jupyter notebook.
Yeah, you can call it from wherever, but just the way the notebook is set up right now, it has those file paths.
Same file
So it
paths,
would just be more convenient if the data is inside the repository folder. But
Gotcha.
if they want to keep it elsewhere, they can just change the paths when we get to the notebook.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I'm still struggling with this prevention authenticate thing. And I think that I followed all of the instructions to do the other thing, install the G-Cloud CLI. I don't know now. I'm still getting a message that says command not found in Earth Engine.
Do you have the Earth Engine? Did you?
There are a few people in the chat that also have an issue with this. That is, Isabel Kyoto suggested a fix. I'm not sure if it's the same
Sure if there's a
Maybe,
joining in on this.
I think you may not have Earth Engine installed in the environment. I think if you do install this one, it installs Earth Engine automatically. But
Can you explain what you mean by like, do I need to now, do I need to do everything, like I closed my terminal, so I can now reopen and rerun everything?
no, you don't have to rerun everything. So if you open your terminal and you type, I got what you mean. So if you open your terminal and you type Conda activate CTMap,
Okay,
and then you try this, it should work.
okay, and what is that doing?
Conda activate CTMap is taking you to the environment where you set everything up.
Okay,
So I think if you reopen your terminal and don't activate the environment, it will start operating in your base environment, which doesn't have all the things that you installed. Does that make sense?
does make sense. Yeah, okay, so now I can, now it takes me to this thing. So should I have that? Okay, so this means I'm now in the environment and the thing is actually.
Yes. And now if you try Earth Engine Authenticate, it should
Yeah, then
work.
it like pops open a Google.
Yeah, so you just go to the account with which you have Earth Engine and then you say allow or whatever it says.
Okay, and then now I think I'm lost on what the next steps are.
Okay, so after all this is done, you clone the repository that we'll be using today, which is this one.
Okay, I've already done that.
And then you basically download this data that we'll be using today, which is in this link.
It says that G-Cloud is not recognized.
G-Cloud is not recognized. You already installed the, did you already install G-Cloud?
Is that just common install G-Cloud?
No, you have to follow the steps here. You have to like download one of these files depending on what machine you're on, and then just I think there's one more step that you need to do, and then you have to type G-Cloud in it or something like that.
Is that, can we find that through the?
Yes, it's here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And how do I move something into a Git repository?
So
What's my Git? I don't know.
so basically, let's see. So basically, this is where I cloned my repository. So when you cloned your repository, you must have been in some folder, right? And then like if I try to see what all is there, there is like a folder that was created when I cloned my repository.
Mhm.
So I just want to go inside that. So I just say CD and then I'm basically inside the repository. Now I have everything that's in the repository.
Okay. So when you say copy paste into the copy the data into the repository, you're saying I can figure out where my repository is by listing the thing,
Mhm.
like in my terminal, and then I can drag and drop. I don't know how to copy paste from terminal.
Yeah, you don't need to copy paste from terminal. You can just physically do that. Like, let's say it's downloaded into
Okay.
your downloads file. You just go to wherever your repository is and you just paste it there. Yeah. Does it work now?
Yeah. It's,
Okay.
I literally didn't see the hyperlink that you put.
No worries.
And sorry, the repository is the not Google Cloud SDK, or is it Geo4Dev CT map?
It's the Geo4Dev CT map.
Okay, that's already getting there.
Okay. Do you think we should move forward?
Maybe give like one more minute. I think some people in the chat were also having the same problems. There might be a few people still installing.
Okay.
But maybe, yeah, maybe another minute or so.
Mhm.
There's a question in the chat. If we could show how to find the Git repo in the local drive to drag to the data folder.
Basically, that would depend wherever they cloned it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's in their home directory. I don't know where they cloned it. So where they type the git clone command. So if I give my example, when I had to, so for example, if I open the terminal at my end, so this is what pops up. So I'm in my home folder. Then I go to the folder where I want to clone the repository. I don't know where they cloned it. So for example, I will. So this is where I keep my Git repos, and then this is where I typed the git clone command. So that's why it's here. And then I can now go to the repo. Basically, I know that it's here, so I go inside that.
Gotcha.
What is this one that you are executing? Is it which software?
This is terminal like SSH. Yeah, it's Mac. It's on Mac. Yeah. If you're not able to like run everything on your system, that's also fine. You can still see what's happening. I just thought it might have been better if everyone can also like do things at the same time. Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, essentially, like I want to open the notebook where I have all the code. So what I do is I first go into the repo, which I just cloned, and then I activate the environment that we have set up, and then I open my Jupyter notebook, and this is some code that I put up so that we can all like see the steps that are involved in like using remote sensing and machine learning together, specifically for crop type mapping. So if you all have this notebook also working at your end, you can open it up, and then I'll just go through each of these steps and try to explain what's happening there. And then we can also see some outputs for each of those to see what goes in and then basically what comes out. So these are just some libraries that we would need in the entire process. And I've tried to simplify it a lot. Of course, like if you want to implement this at scale, like there are a lot of data engineering issues as well that you need to take care of. But here we'll just be working in a very small area in Malawi. It's just like 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers. And we'll be using that to kind of see what goes on when we pull satellite imagery and then train machine learning models on that. So here I just have some dummy survey data. It just has 5 rows. It's not real data. It's just something that I created. So we would read that in, and then essentially like this is kind of what you might expect your survey data to look like, or any kind of data to look like when you are getting it from some other sources. It would have some variables. You might need some of them, you might not need others. The important ones for us here are this one, which has the geometry, which is what we need to figure out where the survey data is coming from. And then we have some other important ones like which crop it is, which are essentially our labels for machine learning. And then like there are some ID variables, etc., etc. So firstly, so I just want to clean this file up so that it looks like what I want to use. And of course, this will depend on what data you have. So this process would look different with each data set. And basically, whenever you do this process, it would look different. This is just a very trivial example, which I just wanted to show you also. For example, here the geometry column is of string type. So I first want to convert it into a dictionary, which I can then convert to a geometry type from using Shapely. So I do that, and now this column looks different. It's a polygon, and then there are coordinates inside the polygon. And then there are some other things. For example, I want to add a unique ID to each row. That's, yeah.
What are these coordinates, like they centrally?
These coordinates are actually boundaries of the polygon. So essentially like 4 corner points of the geometry. They can look different also, like a field might have a more complicated shape. It might not just be a rectangle or like a quadrilateral. So it can look different also, but I just physically put these points on the map and copy them here. But when you actually look at real field data, it can have like 10 or 20 sets of lathlons inside the polygon. Yeah.
So just to confirm, we don't have access to this.
What do you mean?
Like, do we have anything for this notebook? Is it from the repository?
Yeah, it's so in the repository you cloned.
Okay.
If you go inside that repository and you type Jupyter Notebook,
Sure.
you will see this. and then you can open the notebook.
Sorry, what did you put?
Just this. Mhm.
Like when I found it was embedded, you just showed it. It has tests, G tools, examples, license. It doesn't have this exact.
Did you clone this repo?
No, it's the other one.
So essentially, like,
Oh, okay, so I have to come.
yeah, so I think you may have followed this step, but then you also need to clone the repo that we will be
Oh,
using.
Can you explain this? What are those two? Like,
So this is the repository that I've prepared for this workshop. It has all the code that we'll be using today.
Mhm.
And then this is just another repository that provides us some tools. This is what we installed into our environment. So this was like in one of the steps that we needed to set up the environment. So we won't actually be modifying any of this code today. This just has some tools that we need today. Does anyone have access to this notebook? On the, okay. Yeah, let me know if you need any specific help to start it.
so we have to change directory again to this one.
Yes.
here, but then I don't know how to like. Sorry, that's for the. You just see.
If you're already activate in the activated environment, then you don't need to write this one. Okay.
Just to be like labeling, so like, can you kind of explain? or maybe I'll try and explain. So like, you have two GitHub things, repositories, and one of them has some instructions, and the other one has some like more general stuff that you use for all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And you have had us load both of them sometimes, or like, yeah, like, how did we get both of them?
Right. So basically, this one that I'm using today, it's just for the purpose of this workshop. It just has some very simplified code that we will be using today, just to see how we perform the different steps. I wouldn't actually use this for real when I actually want to produce a maze map for Kenya, for example. I will maybe try to write this code in a different way. But today we are just simplifying the steps a little bit so that we can all see what actually goes on in the process. This one, it has, so for example, Python modules, for example, Pandas. Pandas has some tools that you use when you want to look at tabular data, analyze tabular data. So you use Pandas. So you can also write your own modules. So this is an example of that. This is a module that we have written ourselves, which has a lot of useful tools and functions and objects that we use when we want to do crop type mapping, for example. So this one just has some functions and tools that help us use the Python Earth Engine API much more easily. For example, this is a lot of code that we use regularly. For example, if we want to do some image processing, if we want to export some data from Earth Engine. So instead of writing that code again and again, we can create a module out of that, which we can just call whenever we want to repeat that process. So this is an example of that. This is just providing us with some functionality that will be useful today. But this is the one that has the simplified steps that we use to understand the process. So that's why I opened up this repo in this notebook. And if you see here, I have called some code from the GE Tools module, which I would be using today, which is why we needed to install this. Yeah, thanks for the question, but hopefully that clarifies it for everyone else also. Okay, so I think we are ready to move on now. Okay, let me start at the beginning. So at the very beginning, we just load some functionalities, some modules that we will be needing throughout the process. This has some basic ones like Pandas, GeoPandas, NumPy, etc. And then we also have some machine learning modules like which I'm calling from sklearn. And then I also have some of our own functionality from GE Tools, which we have installed into our environment. So like I said, at the very beginning, we need to look at what kind of field data we have. And we need to clean it a little bit so that it's easy to use, etc. And we have all the right variables. So this is just some dummy data that I created. It just has 5 rows and it doesn't really mean anything. It's just data that I just placed coordinates on a map and I copied those coordinates here and then I just wrote in these values just to show you an example of what kind of field data we use. So at the very beginning, I would just want to clean this data up right now. This is like a regular CSV file. This is a Pandas data frame. It reads this as a string. This geometry doesn't really mean anything to Pandas. So first, I'll just modify this geometry to look like more of what we want. So now it is a polygon. And now since it is a polygon, we can convert it from a Pandas data frame to a GeoPandas data frame. GeoPandas is like a library that we use pretty commonly in all geospatial work. So it has pretty much the same functionality as Pandas, but you can apply it, but just with the but just with geospatial features added on to it. So I converted into a geodata frame and just take only the columns I need and then store it as a geo package instead of a CSV. So after you do that, you see that your survey data now also has like a clean file, which looks like a shape file. Any questions so far?
Are we doing this?
Yeah, you can now run this with me because you have all the setup, the necessary setup. The online people are kind of
Yeah, I
there.
haven't seen too many questions recently, so I think we can continue.
Okay. So the next step is feature engineering, which you might have heard of if you've used machine learning a little bit. So essentially, you can think of basically, if you think of satellite data, what is it? It's just capturing images of things over the planet, and we can read in those images. But like we somehow need to make sense of it, right? So here I'm just showing you an example of what imagery actually looks like. So this is just some location, and you can imagine that we might have captured imagery at that location on many days during the year. This is an example from Landsat 8. So you can see like every few days, we capture an image. Now that image might have many different bands. It has like any image, the red band, blue band, green band, etc., and some more bands as well. For example, the near infrared band. So it has many different bands. Now I'm just showing you an example of a specific value that we can obtain from these bands, which is called NDVI, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. This is the formula. It just measures, it just uses these bands from the imagery and kind of gives something that we can make more sense of. It's like, it's kind of a measure of how green an area is. So you can imagine that we get these snapshots from those locations every few days. For example, we got something in March maybe, and then we got something in June, July, etc. And then we got a lot of images throughout the whole year. So this shows just what we covered from 2013 to 2016, and you can see that these values kind of go up and down. And you can imagine, especially like if it's an agricultural field, you can imagine that when there is just soil, it will have very little greenness. But then you sow your seeds, and then through time, as your crop starts growing, it starts looking more and more green. And then after a few months, once the crop cycle has completed, you'll harvest your crops, so it will kind of go back to being not green. So it kind of goes in like a cyclic manner, which is what we also see here. There's some of this everywhere, whether it's a field or not. Like even if you capture imagery from a forest or something, you will see some of this up and down. But you see more of this in an agricultural field for obvious reasons. It goes through a lot of changes during the year. So this is kind of what we want to leverage in our machine learning pipeline. So we feel that this is an important distinction that machine learning models can use to figure out what is an agricultural field and what is something else. Because agricultural fields go through more variation during the year as compared to, like, say, a building or a road or a forest even. So that's the kind of difference we want to leverage. And we feel that we can get that from satellite imagery. We also need to process the imagery in a certain way.
Can I just go back and still I'm not able to do anything yet?
Mhm.
Like, I got to where I could open the Jupyter notebook, so I typed that in my terminal.
Mhm.
And then I double clicked on the thing, open this, so I can see this,
Mhm.
but I don't understand what I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially, you just, for example, in any cell, you press Shift Enter, and that means you've run that cell.
Oh, you run this online? Or-
This is not actually online. It's just like an interface that helps you. Yeah, it's just a very convenient platform that you can use to run Python code.
Okay. And so to run this, how did you get, what did you do?
So if you want to run the first cell, you say, you press Shift and Enter,
Okay,
and that means it has run.
okay, that's a shortcut for the run thing. And that's running that code in
Mhm.
Python.
Yes.
Okay, and then how do I know what's happening?
Like here, you are just pulling in the functionality you need. So that if it's not giving you any error here, it means that
Good.
you have all this functionality in your environment. And then basically, like if you output something, you see that output here. Otherwise, like whatever your code is, that runs in Python.
Okay.
If it doesn't run, it will give you an error.
Okay, I think I got my first error, which says unable to revert n/library/font. Maybe that's a good sign. Not too bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wouldn't
No,
be
that
able to
one.
help you
Okay,
with specific
cool.
errors like that.
Yeah, but basically we should just like run all these things and some output will come out.
Yes.
Great, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I was talking about how you use satellite imagery specifically for crop type mapping. There's a specific difference that we try to leverage specifically for something that is in a field versus not in a field. So that's what I was trying to explain here. You have like imagery that is captured at locations different times during the year, and that helps you understand how things are going up and down. And what we use for that is like something called the harmonic regression. So essentially, like if we look at a very small duration of time here, let's say we start from August 2015 to August 2016, so 1 year. So this is what like the imagery looks like, the blue points. We can try to fit a model that replicates this relationship with time. So that's called like a harmonic regression, and you can read up more about it in general. But it just helps us understand how things are changing everywhere. And it gives us like a set of coefficients that we can then use in our machine learning model. So just for the sake of demonstration, I am using a very small region in Malawi. So I'm using the GE map tool that helps us do things that you can do with Earth Engine in a Jupyter notebook. So here we just see a very small region in Malawi, and this square here is the area that we will be using for demonstration purposes. And here the red things are the dummy fields that I created. So this is the kind of data that we work with. So you have some field boundaries that come from surveys, and then you have like, here we just see the Google base map in the background. But we also, this is where we will be producing our maps and pulling all of our imagery for, yeah.
So do the dummy fields serve as a training field?
I actually won't be using dummy fields in the training process. I have some training data, like a section of the training data that we can use. But here I'm just using the dummy fields to show you how we actually pull satellite data and how we generate composites for features and labels. So that I will be showcasing with the help of this fields. Yeah, so this is just like a very small area in Malawi, just 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer. And then I want to show you what satellite data looks like from Sentinel. So Sentinel is like a satellite from the European Space Agency, and it has approximately a 5-day frequency, which means that wherever you are in the world, about every 5 days, a new image is captured, which is pretty good frequency. So here, what I'm doing is I'm pulling all the imagery for 1 year in Malawi for that very small square that I showed you. So this goes from 28th August 2018 to 27th August 2019. The reason I chose these dates was because Malawi has like the middle of the agricultural season kind of falls between these dates, and I obtained that information from FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization. So this is just an approximation of what the agricultural season is, and then we choose dates accordingly. So here I'm using our inbuilt, I'm using our own GE tools module, and I'm using that to pull all the imagery. So what this one is doing, this block is doing, is it is taking all of the Sentinel images that were captured from 28th August 2018 to 27th August 2019. And it is, it is basically doing that for this time interval for that geography. And there's some image processing involved, which I wouldn't go into too much detail of. Basically, imagery is also a little noisy because sometimes there can be clouds where you're capturing an imagery. So you don't want the cloudy data because that's actually noisy and it can actually harm your feature engineering. So that's why I'm removing all of the cloudy data here. And then I just want to show you that these are all of the bands that we have in this imagery. So you can read up about what each of these is if you actually go to ESA's website. But for example, like blue, green, red, we are pretty familiar with these. But there are also some things we have added, for example, GCVI and NDVI, which are formulas based on these bands. And they help us understand like agricultural related variables. For example, GCVI is greenness chlorophyll vegetation index. It also measures like the amount of greenness in a field. Ideally, like we want more GCVI. The more GCVI, the better, because that means the crop is growing well. If the GCVI is low, it means that the crop is not growing that well. So that's kind of a good way to understand this. Now, just for the sake of an example, I pulled the time series data for 3 fields in Malawi and provided that here in this folder. So you can see this is called maize time series, groundnut time series, soybean time series. So it has like, if you open this CSV file, it just has like a date, the GCVI value on that date, and then the year. So you can see like it doesn't actually have 365 rows because we don't have an observation every day of the year. We only have an observation every 5 days. And out of that also we removed some observations because they were cloudy. So it has only about 44 values during the year. And what I want to show you here is what we want to do with those time series values. So here, what I'm showing you is for these three fields, we have the blue points, which was actually what was captured by the satellites. And then like the red is what we are fitting to it. It's our assumption of what the entire time series might have looked like if we had an observation every day. So we are able to do this through the process of harmonic regressions that I was explaining earlier. So essentially what you can see here is that the curve for maize looks a little bit different from groundnut, which looks a little bit different from soybean. So this is some information that we can utilize for distinguishing between these different crops. So if the model sees this kind of a curve, it will know that it's likely to be maize. If a model sees this kind of a curve, it will know that that's probably groundnut or something else, or at least that's not maize, which we are focusing on today. We just want to figure out whether something is maize or it is not maize. So we can see that maize looks different from groundnut. It also looks different from soybean. If you had other examples of different crops, they might also have looked different. So this is the difference that we want to leverage in our models.
And I think this is to be expected because like depending on how tall the plant is,
Yeah.
vegetation index is low. So probably this makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So depending on how tall the plant is, depending on how it flowers, maize would flower differently from how groundnut would flower. It also depends on when the crops were sown. So farmers might actually decide to plant maize in November, but they might plant groundnut in January. I'm just saying, like, if you look at the lowest areas here, I'm assuming that that's kind of a signal that around this time was when crops were planted, because after that, the value started increasing. But in the case of groundnut, you can see that crops were planted maybe around December, and then the value started increasing. For soybean, again, like the sowing date is kind of similar to maize, but it goes to a higher peak value as compared to maize. So essentially, there's some difference between each of these crop types, and that is the difference we want to leverage in our models. And the way we showcase this difference is through the coefficients from the harmonic model. So the coefficients that we used to produce this red line, essentially. So when you might be familiar with linear regression. So the linear regression has like an intercept and slope coefficient. Similarly, in the case of harmonic regressions, we also have cosine and sine terms that take care of this cyclic relationship with time. So we have coefficient terms not just for the slope and intercept, but we also have coefficients for cosine and sine terms. And those coefficients essentially help us distinguish between these different crops.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand where so it's like if we have data and labels for this several locations across time.
Mhm. We actually have the labels only for a single year. So essentially, like you can imagine that maize is planted once a year. So we just need one label for 1 year, but we have a lot of satellite data for that year.
And so we need to know that it was planted, like when it was planted, that during the whole time it was only that location.
We don't actually need to know when it was planted. We're actually capturing that information here with the help of satellite data. So if you look at the survey data I initially showed you, it had incomplete planting date information, And it's very rare to actually get this information also such that it's accurate. So we don't actually rely on this information at all. We just use the label and the year and the geometry. But when we pull satellite data for those locations, we notice that there are some relationships with time. And when I look at this curve for maize, it kind of, to me, it kind of makes sense that, okay, maybe maize was planted sometime in November based on how the greenness is varying for maize.
And then when we want to sort of predict the things for which we don't have the labels, we don't have the labels, are we going to do it based on a single point in time or across?
So where we don't have labels, we would use the satellite imagery for those points. And that satellite imagery would also have many observations for the year, right? So even on that imagery, we can kind of fit this red line. And with the help of satellite imagery, we can still get an understanding of how things were changing during that year. And then we will tell the model that this is how things were changing here in this pixel. So can you please tell us like what it could be? And then the model will see, oh, this looks similar to this kind of curve, this looks similar to this kind of curve, and that's how it will decide what the crop is. Okay, so so essentially, like here I'm just showing you an example of 3 points in Malawi, but we have Sentinel imagery for all over Malawi, right? And that imagery comes at a resolution of 10 meters by 10 meters, which means that for every 10 meters by 10 meters, we have like a value, a pixel value. I'm assuming that you all know like pixels because we use images or photographs all the time, but like higher resolution is better. So 10-meter resolutions is especially useful here in the case of East Africa because the field sizes there are very small. So for example, if you have like a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer pixel, that will just like cover the entire field and also a lot of things outside. So it will not give us like sufficient resolution to figure out what is crop and what is non-crop. The reason for using Sentinel is that it comes at a very good resolution of 10 meters, which is kind of sufficient for crop type mapping in a country like Malawi, where the field sizes are very small. So here I have just 3 points in Malawi, but I want to fit this red curve, not just for these 3 points. I want to do this for every point in Malawi. And what that means is we would need to do this kind of mathematical curve fitting on a lot of data for a lot of pixels. So essentially, it's like 10 meters by 10 meters and thousands or hundreds of thousands of those pixels. So, and then for each pixel, you will have imagery for the entire year. So that kind of multiplies a lot. So it actually becomes terabytes of data. So which is why we use Earth Engine to do all of these calculations, because Earth Engine has this cool setup where you can use Google's cloud servers to do these calculations, and they happen parallelly, semi-parallelly. So you can imagine if there are 10 pixels, it can do calculations for 10 of them at the same time. So things are much faster. So I could do this calculation on my computer because this was easy enough for my computer to do. It was just looking at 3 of these pixels and was fitting 3 of these red curves. But when I want to do this for all over that rectangle, I would use Earth Engine to do that. And I have an example of that here. So this code, run STD regressions, is actually some code we have in our library. It has a lot of functionality which does this curve fitting for every pixel in the image. So that's what we're using here. And when we run this, it actually exports an image with all of these coefficients to Earth Engine. So I already have this pre-exported, so it will give me an error right now. But if you were to do this, it will take maybe a minute or so to export this to your asset library. Here is, so I just want to show you what that means. So this is that same rectangle we had earlier, which we saw in the Jupyter notebook. And for each pixel in this rectangle, we have all of the coefficients related to the curve fitting, which was shown by the red curve in the figure that we saw. So that means like there's a constant term, there's a cosine term I'm using, and there's like there's a sine term, there's also a linear time term, and so on. I also have some other variables like the R squared of that regression, the RMSE of that regression, and those things also. But this is the kind of information we are storing for every pixel. You can see that the band has a dimension of 500 by 500, which makes sense because we had a region of 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers, and if you and our pixel size is 10 meters, so that means you have 500 pixels by 500 pixels. So that's what we have here. And then the resolution is 10 meters, like I was telling you earlier. And yeah.
So this is like each one is like an image. So instead of 2 dates, and then you get all the images.
Mhm.
Between 2 dates, or is it something else?
So when I obtained an image, all the images between those 2 dates, I had the raw images, which had the red band, blue band, GCDI band, and so on. But now I'm kind of aggregating those images using the harmonic curve fitting. So this is actually not the raw images. This is the features I've obtained from those images, which is why the bands are called GCDI constant, GCDI mean, GCDI cos1, and so on. If you look at the original images, they had the bands that I displayed earlier, like the blue band, the red band, etc.
When you're thinking, sorry, you're regressing what?
I'm regressing the VI on time.
Oh,
So if you look at this one, it kind of looks like this. So you're regressing the band on time, and you are adding in functionality with the help of cosine and sine terms. There are very good tutorials on this as well, like just in general on harmonic curve fitting. It especially is very useful for like these kind of agricultural related activities. So this was what we had in the original image, but we needed some way to make sense of all of this information, and we use this process to do that. Basically we need to do this for all pixels, and that's what we just did. We exported this kind of information for all pixels in the image, and then I just want to show you what that looks like. Here we have like kind of the same area we had earlier. And I'm just trying to visualize the coefficients in a specific manner using the cosine and sine terms that we exported. So you can kind of see that, like you can kind of see the field boundaries a little bit clearly. And this means that our features are kind of capturing the differences in these fields. So you can see, for example, maybe this field here is different from the fields surrounding it, because this one looks green, but the surrounding one looks purple. There are some pinks, and so these colors don't really mean much. I'm just trying to show you the difference that is captured by the features.
What about the differences that we see in like the, I believe it's a waterway, right? At the top.
This one,
No, I just mean like some where the pixels are very noisy. This seems to be like a creek of some sort or some like a small river.
mhm,
So does that, like, how does that information end up affecting our prediction?
this one.
Yeah.
So this is another thing is that I'm just showing you the differences in GCDI.
Uh-huh.
We'll also have these differences for a lot of other bands. So for example, we'll also look at these same differences for NDVI as well. We'll also look at these same differences for the blue band as well. So in the end, when we actually train a model, we'll be training it on all of these differences and not just GCDI. So for example, just with GCDI, maybe you won't be able to figure out that this is not a field,
Yeah.
or that this is a certain kind of crop or not. But with the other things, like it will become more clear, like what the creek or the river is.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Thank you.
But even here, you see, like you do see this boundary. You're still able to make out that something else is going on here.
I like the animation here, like the prediction, I guess, is done with this picture. Like you have the coefficient that come from the regression,
Mhm.
and then you make the prediction based on the data of this specific date.
I have not even made any prediction right now. I'm just showing you what my features look like, the features that I will be using to train the model. And this is not date specific, it's year specific, because these features have been obtained on the entire year of data and not just a specific date,
Okay.
because we are using the entire year's data to capture this relationship.
There are a few questions in the chat, but if it's up to you if you have time to answer.
I can take them, yeah, right now. I
Yeah,
think
so
that's
I guess one is so Sophie Eiling is asking if the Sentinel data doesn't contain the information on the crop type. We're inputting that from the DF. Is that right? And then a similar question from Isabel, where does the ground truth data come from to identify the harmonic curves of different crops? For example, if we wanted to use these methods on their own.
Okay, so for the first one, no, the Sentinel data doesn't have crop type information. If it did, then you wouldn't need to use all of this. We are basically trying to use all the other information Sentinel data has to predict or what could be in those pixels. And for the other question, like the ground truth data for like this is just dummy data. This doesn't mean anything. But for our actual activities, we actually receive that kind of data from our partners. For example, the World Bank, it conducts LSMS surveys in different countries, and it shared those surveys with us. So that's what we used for crop type mapping in Malawi, for example. That's where we got our data. There are other examples also. For example, in Kenya, we had some data from 1 Acre Fund a few years back. So that actually comes with people who are collecting these kind of surveys on the ground. Does that answer those questions?
Yeah, so that's good. And then there's one other how does the harmonic curve fitting method handle NaN values or NaN values?
Yeah.
Due to cloud cover or other things. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. So for example, here, if we look at this one, especially if you see groundnut, there aren't really any observed points from after January, yeah, for almost all of February. Yeah, so I think January and February, that's because they might have been covered with clouds. But the advantage is that even if we have some pixels, kind of like some are here, some are here, some are here, we can still kind of guess the shape of the curve. And obviously there would be issues, like if there are pixels where you have only 2 observations during the year, only less than 10 observations during the year, it would be much harder to fit this curve. And if the curve is not fitted well, then it would lead to all kinds of problems in your predictions. But this is the best we can do given cloud cover.
And then there's one final question. Sorry, we can try and get to them all. If there was how would the compositing change when you look at multiple years in this case? For example, how would time be considered? Yeah.
Right. So what you mean is like if we had some fields from 2018 and some from 2019 and so
Yeah.
on, in that case, you'll just pull the relevant data for the fields that were, for the data that I got from 2018, I'll pull 2018 satellite data. For the data that I got from 2019, I'll pull 2019 satellite data.
I was just wondering, so in the map of all the coefficients, in like the top left and bottom left corners, there's like some pixels where there is no coefficient. You know why that happened?
That would just be that we weren't able to fit the regression, maybe because there was no data there for, that would be my guess. I wouldn't know exactly what the situation is, but that usually happens if there was no cloud-free pixel during the entire year, then the regression would just fail and that coefficient would not be stored.
Because there only were 40 something samples.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Even here, there are only about 40 or something. That even 40 is fine, but if I had only 1 or 0 or 4,
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
out of the 40 samples, none
Yeah.
of them.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so like I said earlier, here I'm only showing you how GCVI looks like how our features from GCVI look like. But in reality, we would not just be doing this for GCVI, but for a lot of bands and a lot of indices. And our hope is that when we look at all that information, the machine learning model will be somewhat successful in giving us the right guess of what the crop is. Yeah, I may not have said this earlier, but this task is actually a very difficult task that we are trying to do. This machine learning task is especially in countries in East Africa, where there's a lot of noise, where there's a lot of intercropping. Intercropping means having 2 different crops in the same field. So this is a challenging task, and what we are trying to do here is just trying our best to get the information from satellites to help us make the best guess of what the crop might be there. So yeah, like I said, here now we have the features for the entire geography, well, partial features because it's only GCVI. The next step that I said earlier would be to combine the features with those labels. So I had shown you earlier, with my dummy data, I had, this is where I have the ground data. So this red field. I have features everywhere here, but this is where I have the survey data. So my next task is to get the features in these fields and kind of make a table which has all the features and then the associated label. So that's what I'll do next. Here what I'm doing is, so I believe one of my fields was somewhere here. So one field may have several pixels. So one field may have 2 pixels, 10 pixels, and we have these features for every one of those pixels. So what I'm doing here is I'm just averaging all of the pixels for a given field so that I have like a single value of features for every field. I can also do other things. I can also just capture 1 point inside the field and get the associated features. I can also capture several points inside the field and get the associated features. That would, you can imagine that would also boost the size of our training data, and more training data is always good. But there are pros and cons of each of these methods. And we have actually discussed those in our original paper that Vivek initially mentioned. So if you're interested, you can give that a read. But for now, I'm just using the average of the pixels. Was there a question?
Maybe just a question. So you're averaging by year or just over or periods of time?
I'm averaging the different pixels in a field.
But these pixels were taken.
From 1 year. So
Oh,
these
okay.
features were created from 1 year. Yeah. Yeah, they're not averaged over the year. They're like fitted over the year, like with the harmonic curve. But we will be averaging in space the space inside the field. All right, so that's what I want to show here. This is the averaging bit that I was just explaining. And the good thing is with Earth Engine, there's actually a lot of good documentation. So if you go inside docs here and you try to search for the function I'm using here, image.reduce region, you can actually see it gives you a decent explanation of what that function does. So if later on you want to look at the notebook again and try to understand the code in more detail, this is one option of doing that. So like I was saying, I'm doing the averaging bit here, and this is like here what I'm doing is so I'm defining a function here for averaging, and here I'm applying the function to every field. And then after applying the function to every field, now I'm exporting a CSV that will contain that feature label combination. So this will export in a minute or two if you are, so yeah, the way you see that is you go to your Earth Engine account and you go to the task bar here, and it shows you like the tasks you have executed. So here, this is what exported for me just now. And if I try to find it, it will be in my Google Drive home folder of my Google Drive. But if this is not running for you for some reason, it is also stored here in this folder. So I ran this earlier as well, and it exists in this folder. But if you run it, it will take less than a minute. And this file would actually be somewhere in my home folder, and then I can take it to wherever I take it, or I can export it to the right folder as well. Yeah.
So each row in the table represents one of the dummy fields.
Yes. So now I'll show you. This is what the export will look like, and this is just like each field. So this is the polygon boundary for each field, and these are all the features for that field. So now this looks like something we are more familiar with, just like a CSV file which has features and labels, and with that it's kind of it's kind of more straightforward to train machine learning models. Yeah. So here that's what we have. So now I'll move on to the next step of training a machine learning model. This is like a very trivial example. Of course, like you can do much better at it, like with more tuning, etc. I'm just showing you an example here. And before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about metrics, which is basically how do we understand how well the model is doing. So we use two different metrics for that. One is accuracy, which is more popular. It's just accuracy, like how many of the fields were identified correctly. If it was not maize, did we identify it as not maize? If it was maize, did we identify it as maize? So it's just like the number of true positives and true negatives divided by everything else, true positives, true negatives, false positives, false negatives. So it's a relatively simple metric. But sometimes this metric is not that great. So for example, let's assume that we had 99 out of 100 fields that were maize. And we train a machine learning model, and that just classifies everything as maize. We would just get one wrong, right? So we would have a very good accuracy of 99%, but that doesn't mean that the model was good, because it was essentially just trained to predict that everything is maize. So for that, we also use a more...
Is the prediction of the model 0, 1?
0, 1, yeah, it's just maize, non-maize. So it's binary. So
One per crop.
yeah, it's 0 for non-maize and 1 for maize. So yeah, so accuracy can be good, but not so good sometimes. So we also use a more balanced metric, which is called Matthews correction coefficient. And like the formula is here, but the idea here is that we are trying to get a good performance, not just on like the majority class, but on everything. If something is, we want to get all the, we want to get like the positives and the negatives right, and we actually evaluate performance based on each of these scores: true positives, true negatives, false positives, and false negatives. So you can read up more about what this metric is, but it's a very rigorous metric to evaluate machine learning models. For accuracy, it goes from 0 to 1. The 0 is the worst, 1 is the best, 1 means we got everything right. For Matthews correction coefficient, it goes from -1 to +1. So +1 represents we're doing, it's a perfect prediction. 0 means we're just predicting randomly. We didn't learn anything, we're just saying anything is anything randomly. And -1 is we're actually doing the opposite of what we should be doing. So yeah. So here, like I said, I've just provided some data from Malawi to show you an example of machine learning modeling. So this data actually has 1,000 rows. So this is, we had about 12,000 fields in Malawi. So I just randomly picked 1,000 out of that for the sake of today's workshop. So this is what the data, the training data actually looks like for us. So like I said, here I have not just GCVI, but a lot of other things as well. For example, aspect, it is like an elevation related variable, which is also very important. Elevation actually is a very good predictor for crop type mapping. And then we also have the harmonic coefficients for a lot of the bands, not just the GCVI band. So blue, GCVI, and then there are others, green, and so on. So as you can see, this has 129 columns. Out of those 129, 3 are just like, this one is the label, and these 2 are not really anything. This is just the ID variable, and this is the year. So these 3 are not features, but the rest are. So it has 126 features and 1,000 rows. 1,000 is not much, so we shouldn't expect like great performance after training on these 1,000 rows. But this is just for the sake of demonstration. So I also want to show you in this data frame, in these 1,000, how many are actually the positive class and how many are the negative class. So we have about 71% ones and about 29% zeros. So you can already see that this is a little bit imbalanced. So if our model is kind of incentivized to predict more maize, and that's what we want to watch out for, which is why MCC, the other metric that I showed you, becomes important for us. So I have a very simple model here. I'm not doing much here, and not even hyperparameter tuning much, but first I'm just picking out the features and storing them in a separate variable X, and then I'm storing my labels in a separate variable Y. I'm using grid search to search over a different grid of hyperparameters. So hyperparameters are just attributes of your machine learning model. So if you look at a random forest, you can see that there are a lot of things that you can vary. So these are all hyperparameters. So N estimators, I'm not sure how familiar you are with random forests, but random forest means that there are many different decision trees that are trying to operate on our data, and then we are taking some kind of an aggregate of all of those decision trees to make the final decision of what the classification should be. So n estimators, for example, means how many trees you have in the model. And there are several other parameters. And you can imagine that some of these can lead to overfitting, some of these can lead to underfitting. These are all concepts of machine learning. Overfitting means that you will do very well on the training data, but on everything else you will do poorly. Underfitting means that you're not learning enough. So that's why like you always kind of vary these hyperparameters a little bit. That's called tuning. And that's what we are trying to do here. The goal is neither to overfit nor to underfit. So I think this will take maybe a little bit of time because I'm tuning a little bit. But after that, we'll have like an output for hyperparameter tuning. This is stored from before, actually also completed. But yeah, I just want to show you what that looks like. Yeah, there weren't a lot of different variations I tried, but this just gives me like a sense of how I was performing with each of those different variations of the model. So I have both the accuracy and the MCC, and I have it both for the training and the test set. I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm just using a simple cross-validation method here with 5 poles. That means that I'm dividing the training data into 5 equal sets. And then like I take 4 of them and use those as my training set, and I take 1 of them and use that as my test set. So I train on the 4 and then test on the one that I left out, and then I train again. Then I change the train and validation. I take the next 4 as training and leave the other one out as validation. So that's what cross validation is. So here I just wanted to show you the results of the model. Like I said, it's not great, but for example, the MCC, which is a metric that is more rigorous, was about 0.57 on the training set or the training folds, and it was about 0.27 in the validation folds. So clearly, like we are doing better on the training set than on the validation set, but with such little data, that's very easy to happen, because if you have very little data, it's going to be very easy to just learn every row and give that the right prediction. But when you see new data, it's harder to understand what that is. But some of these problems reduce when you have more data for training. And then, like I said earlier, we see very good accuracy, but we don't see that good of an MCC.
So what do you do with like your values? I mean, less than what's good.
I mean, so for our actual models, this value goes from about 0.35 to about 0.6. And the accuracy maybe goes from about 0.75 to 0.9 or something. So it's not that bad, but it's not the best. But the idea is that this is what we can do. And researchers are just continuously trying to improve on these methods. So you might find out, like in some paper, they actually found that, oh, it's maybe instead of using all the harmonic coefficients, just use the peak, or maybe just use like these actual daily values instead of using the coefficients, and that will make your models better. So that's like an area of continuous research. But like with our best models and best methods, we are able to achieve MCCs from 0.35 to 0.65 or 0.6 or something. we're trying to improve that continuously, but that's the best we can do right now. And the idea is that we won't have this data at all otherwise, like an understanding of where, which crops are where, everywhere in Malawi, for example. So this is kind of helping us get closer to the truth.
Are there other things besides crop choice that these methods have been used to fit?
Yeah, for sure. So so right now I'm showing you how to classify maize and non-maize.
Right.
Similarly, we have also done crop versus non-crop, which is an easier task.
Okay.
And then at our company, we also do things that are completely different, which doesn't involve like any of this harmonic fitting or time series, this kind of time series data. We also have predictions on wealth in a region. We also have predictions for electrification at a high resolution, population. So these methods have been used for essentially for generating data which we don't have otherwise, especially like in parts of the world where it is not straightforward to collect surveys or to conduct censuses. So that's what this kind of data, like remote sensing data, is especially used for, and we do use it for other tasks as well, apart from just crop type mapping.
And then for this crop type mapping and fallow versus non-fallow, I'm sure there's other classifications that you meant, land, is this like the best satellite data source? Like, does everyone use this satellite source, or are there other sources that people think are just as good, or does it depend on the country, or?
Sentinel-2 is very commonly used
Okay.
now, because Sentinel-2 was started becoming available only in 2016. So with this methodology, we cannot go back further than 2016. So if we wanted to make a prediction, make this kind of a prediction in 2014, that wouldn't be possible. But if I wanted to make this prediction in 2024, like when 2024 comes, then I would definitely want to use Sentinel-2 because of its, especially because of its resolution. Sentinel-2 does have problems related to cloud cover. It doesn't, for example, Landsat, which is an older satellite, it has a much better cloud removal band that is much easier to use as compared to Sentinel. I'm sure Sentinel will also get better with time, but right now, Sentinel doesn't come with a great cloud masking band. So in those terms, like there are pros and cons of using Sentinel, but for us, the resolution is very important because the field sizes in East Africa are very small. But you will see that Landsat is also used fairly often. Landsat is a satellite with 30 meters resolution, and like if you're in the US or somewhere in Europe, like where field sizes are much bigger, even Landsat would be good. It might even be easier to use Landsat. You also get the advantage of time. You can go back much further.
And just like to hone in a little, sorry to be selfish, but my research does involve also small farmers, and so I'm trying to get a sense of like, you know, when you say like a field, is this typically like even a single farm, you might be able to tell which like parts of the farm are crop versus not crop, or maize versus not maize, or are we more talking like a single hectare farm?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like we are actually predicting at 10 meters resolution. So we can essentially capture variation within the farm. So if you look at this picture, you do see variation even like, for example, if I come here, like there's some variation. So for example, where you see the trees, you do see like more of blue or something like that.
Yeah.
So we can capture variation within fields, whether it's cropped versus non-cropped or whether it's like intercropping. We haven't actually yet tested how well we can differentiate between like intercropped fields, like for example, like within a field, if there's like maize and something else, we definitely do see variation in the amount of maize predicted within a field, but we haven't ever tested like if that is correct or not.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
Because we are measuring our metrics at a field level. We are not measuring the metrics at a pixel level.
Oh, and so the field is defined by the survey.
Yes, the survey doesn't actually have like pixel level information, so we can't actually verify our prediction at a pixel level. We can only verify our prediction at a field level.
And the survey is polygon?
Yeah, it's a polygon.
Okay, so you need a
like I have here.
understand. Right, yeah, okay.
If you had single points, you can use that also, but
You have to
obviously
make
like
some
the polygon.
assumption about the polygon.
Yeah, but the polygon is obviously better. It gives us more information about the field. If I just had like 1 point from inside the field, I would use that also, but it's always better if you have like the full boundary.
I'm curious what trade-offs you made when deciding to do this within Python rather than doing it directly within the Google Earth Engine interface.
We have tried to do this within the Earth Engine. You mean the machine learning part or all of it?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, I haven't seen the full code thus far, but I think a lot of this so far can be done directly in the platform.
It
So I'm
can.
just curious what trade-offs you were making when you chose to do it in Python.
Right. For us, it's just much easier to do and maintain. For example, I do have a lot of code here as well. It's just harder to manage. And because like a lot of our code is in Python, for example, the machine learning model is from sklearn. There is a way to do machine learning even in Earth Engine, but that's very limited. So you can't do as much in Earth Engine. Earth Engine also has like some regression and classification tools, but these won't let me do that much. So I want to do this part in Python definitely. And all of our code base is in Python. So it's much easier to maintain it if we also write the GEE code in Python. But you can do quite a lot of this in the JavaScript API as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, so we're almost at time, and we are also at the last step. So essentially, like now we trained a model, which kind of has an understanding of how to associate features with crop types. So now if I show new features to this model, this can look at those features and give me a prediction of what the crop type there should be. So I can't actually show that code to you because it's proprietary, but essentially like the idea here is that we take this machine learning model, we show it all the data in the country, and then ask it to give us predictions for the entire country. So I'm not able to show you the entire code for that, but what I'm showing you here is our actual predictions for both crop versus non-crop and maize versus non-maize in that small area that we've been looking at. And I just want to show you what the output actually looks like. So here I have this crop versus non-crop. This is a crop versus non-crop map. So the higher, the more concentrated green you see, that means like the higher the probability we are predicting that that is a field. So you can see like if you look at the base map, this part, which is more, it looks like a stream or something, it has actually very low probability of being crop. So when we would actually apply a threshold, when we would actually say, only show me pixels that have more than 50% probability of being crop, a lot of this white area will go away. And then on top of that, I have a prediction for maize versus non-maize. And this is where we see like some fields have higher orange versus others. So that gives us a sense of understanding which of the cropped areas are actually maize versus not maize. So I also want to show you that. So let's say I apply a threshold for both of these rasters. I say I only want to see pixels where the probability of being a crop is more than 50%, and then the probability of me being maize is greater than 50%. So I obtain something like this. This should also appear. Okay, yeah, so now this kind of gives you a sense of what our final output is. So like to your question earlier, it does within fields also, it does show us like some pixels are probably maize, but others are not. Maybe they're intercropped or something like that.
You have like one, like you do a different machine learning for each crop. And then you have like 3 predictions for each. So
Yeah, we don't do a lot of crops actually. We mostly have done maize so far because maize is like the predominant crop in East Africa and a lot of other African countries as well. But we're also trying this with other crops like sorghum and wheat and rice. But we don't have maps for those yet. Yeah.
Information, you know, comparative, does it use the same features at least as well?
Yes. Yeah. So the idea is now that you've seen the model knows how to relate the features to labels, so it will use the same relationship when it looks at new features. Yeah, I think that's it. So that's what I wanted to show you. The idea was that we kind of understand the whole process, and then there's also like bits and pieces of code that you can see to try things out. That's it. Are there any more questions?
There were a couple from the chat. I guess we have a couple minutes if you have time to answer.
Yeah, sure.
So from Miyake, is this random forest method in Python easily adjusted to implement for continuous values regression instead of labeled or labels classification? And if so, how?
So for classification, we always use a classifier. We don't use a regressor. And this classifier actually gives, it can give us either. It can give you a 1, 0, and it can also give you a probability. So here I'm actually showing probabilities, which are more continuous. But sklearn does have a random forest regressor as well.
And then there was another question. If this is an example to predict only one type of crop, maize or not maize, but can you train the model to predict different types of crops?
Yeah, you can. The performance might vary. It might be easier to predict sorghum. It might be harder to predict wheat. So that's something that you can test out with different crops.
One last question that came in, maybe we can call it after that. So does cross-validation have to be adjusted to for the fact that these features spatial and might be serially correlated?
Yeah, you can do that. So I think what they mean is like have only some specific regions in the training set and have other regions entirely in the validation set. That will be like a harder task. I mean, that would probably, it would be even harder to obtain results, obtain great results if you validate on different regions entirely for obvious reasons. But it is possible to do that. You can adjust it here and how you are constructing the training and validation codes.
Great.
Yeah.
Just a more general question. So in terms of the choice between these different indices, how would one go about choosing the one that suits the context better between GCPI versus NDVI? And then a related question is, like, I think we've seen like these measures do not always perform well as compared to crop cuts or the gold standard measures of productivity. So is there some more work that you see recently working on improving them and trying to, because sometimes self-reported measures might be even better, which have their own errors as well.
Mhm.
Curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so for your first question, You were talking about the features. So here I'm just showing you like many different features that were obtained from Sentinel-2. You can do some experimentation on that. For example, you can try models that are using GCDI, but not the others. You can incrementally add features to see how much each feature is adding. So that's one way of checking that. For your other question, so what I'm showing you here is basically the best that we can achieve given the survey data we have. So even, so like you said, so self-reported measures are not that reliable. So we are actually using the labels that the surveyors themselves collected by going to the fields. Those are more reliable than what the self-reported measures are. But even if you wanted to use self-reported, they would also only be from certain number of fields. They would be from the same fields that we have this data from. So, but that survey data will not cover like each 10-meter pixel in the entire country every year. So that's what we are trying to achieve with these methods. And they are not perfect, but they're the best we can do. Okay, yeah, that's it. Hope that was useful to you all. And yeah.
Thank you. Great. Thanks, everyone. As a final note, just want to thank everyone for joining. Really fantastic talk here, Dee. Thank you so much. And I'll be sending around a final email just with some feedback forms. Really appreciate it if folks can fill out one. We have one for each workshop, and we'll also include some links to the tutorials again and the papers that the tutorials were built from. So again, yeah, thank you all. And you can always go to the geo4.dev website to find all of our tutorials, and we'll have the videos